Okay, in this video we want to talk a little bit about other operations in mathematics. We have our basic operations that we can get right from the keyboard, the addition, the subtraction, division, multiplication, and we also, don't forget, we have the percent operator, which is the remainder operator. Those are simple characters that we can use for those operations, and you can see that video on operations if you like. But obviously in mathematics, there's lots more operations than that. There's functions. We have our trig functions, our sine and cosine and tangent and so forth. We certainly, as you can see by my question here on our screen, we want to be able to take the square root of a number. We might want to raise a number to a power. All kinds of operations. We might want to take the absolute value of something. And so the question is, where do you get those? Those aren't going to be keyboard keys. We need to actually use functions for that. And so what those are our methods. Um, so this will be kind of like our first introduction of how am I going to know what these so-called methods. Remember what a method is. A method is a small block of code that has a purpose. We have our main method. It's a small block of code that's the beginning of our program. Um, print line here actually is a method in the system class that has a job that prints to the console screen. So we're going to look now at our API. And so if I click to Moodle Dog, you can see our Java API. I'm linked to it, but you can certainly search Java API. And when you open up the API, it can be overwhelming because basically this is your dictionary or encyclopedia of all things Java. Any predefined class that already exists, it's in here. And that's really the power of Java, is really not recreating the wheel. Why write something if somebody else has already done it for you? You can now just use it and adapt it for your own purpose. And so in the API here, we'll focus on the bottom left here when it says all classes. And I draw your attention to we've already used some classes here. Remember, classes are things with capital letters that by convention. So if I scroll down here, you could see phone ringing in the background. Perfect. So if I scroll down here and get far enough down here, I have a system that I can use, and I can click on that and see things about that class. I can also look up here to another class that you should know a little bit about that we've used. That's the string class. But what I want to do is I want to do math. Now I can scroll up and down here in this API, but I'll show you a little trick that's quicker. If I hit Control F, I should go to the search box here and I can hit math. And I can hit multiple ones. And so there I can click on math and see the math class. So once I get to the math class, and it'll tell me a little bit about it, you can read certainly about the math class, but what I want to focus on first of all is what's above the first line, above the kind of title of class math, is this little thing that says java.lang. And what this is a package. You can see up in the upper left-hand corner, you can actually search for some of these things by package, and I can probably find java.lang right there if I wanted to, and see all the different classes that are in java.lang. But it's important to know the package. You're going to see why I probably want to go to do reading input in from the keyboard. But I'll give you a little bit of a background, is that when Java runs, it only brings in or imports kind of the minimal basic language functions and what really classes, so to speak. And all of those basic default ones, those live in java.lang. So that's the language package, which allows you to do basic, operations in Java. So we really don't have to worry. Anything that's in java.lang we can just use, right away. Some things that are not going to be in java.lang, when we go to do random numbers or read things in from the keyboard, we're going to use some classes that are in different packages, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to bring those in Java, and I'll show you how to do those. But in the math class here now, But really, if you start scrolling down, some things should look familiar. We don't want to really worry and get too tripped up in some of the vocabulary right now, but here in this fields class, you can see two maybe familiar constants in math, e and pi, and we'll talk about how to maybe use those down the road. And then you get in this method part. Now remember, methods are blocks of code that have purpose. So all of these little blocks of code already exist, and they actually, perform the mathematical operation that, is explained here. So for example, ABS, if I look near the top, these are methods that actually take and find the absolute value of different types of numbers, whether they're ints or doubles and so forth. And if you keep scrolling down, you can see the cubed root function here. I'm not scroll down too far. You can start seeing the cosine. Some familiar ones. Some probably the ones that aren't familiar. Logs, log base 10. I scrolled too fast here. And later on, and I'll show you here on the API. So if we get down to here, you can see I have a square root. Now I can actually click, it's a link, I can click on square root and get a little more information about square root if I like. Let me go back here. So, but a couple things about the API here. The API tells you a couple things that are important. Every method, when you go to write it, is going to have parentheses after it. And so what goes in these parentheses are actually the argument of that method. What does that method need to do its job? Well, clearly a square root function would need a number passed to it so it knows what it's going to take the square root of. So here it's telling you that you need to pass it to double the value that you want to take the square root of. Also on the left side here, you can see double. This is slightly different. This is telling you what kind of thing it's going to give you back. This method has a job, and that's to calculate the square root, and this is telling me that it's going to give me that square root back, and it's going to be a double when it gives it back to me. All right, so let's try to actually use this method in our code. So as you can see, I've created a variable called num1. I gave it a value of 12. I could print it out right now. I have a system.out in here, and I'll print out 12. And notice it actually prints out 12.0 because I actually stored the 12 into a double. So it converts that integer automatically to a double and prints out 12.0. So how would I do the square root? So if I wanted to print out, now I'm going to use that method, which was sqrt. Every method has parentheses. In the parentheses, I want to pass it the argument it needs to do its job. So in this case, I need to pass it the number I want to find the square root of. So that would be num1. And this method gives me the double back, so I'm just going to print it out. But here's the thing. There's so many classes in Java that it doesn't know where to find this method without giving it kind of a path, telling it where it's going to find this method. So every time you use a method, you're going to ask, where does that method live? And if that, and when I say where does it live, what class is it in? So it's kind of like a URL when you actually, in a website, when you're giving the address. Here, you're going to qualify the square root method by saying it's in the math class, and then what goes in between the actual class, kind of like in a URL, there's slashes to separate the different folders and file system. Here, the dot operator is what's going to separate the class name from the actual method name in that class. And you can see I got no errors, and so I can print it out, and you expect, square root of 12 is going to be a little more than 3. So we got that. Now, if I did this in 2 lines, I want to point out something, that if I was going to actually store this, square root into, say, a new variable maybe called num2, and then down here just simply print out num2, which I had stored in. And this is very common that you're going to do an operation and you're going to store this value that gives you back. It's giving you back the square root. You're going to store it in to a variable. Now that's why it's important to know what kind of thing it gives you back, because I got to create this variable, so I got to get its type in front of it. If I try to do an int, it's not going to work. I'm still going to get an error because the square root function gives me back a double. So if it gives me back a double, I need to store it in, if I could spell here, into a double. And you can see we have no more errors, and now it actually compile and run, and it works the same way. But when you use a method, there are three questions that you're going to ask yourself every time. I'm going to ask you when you have trouble. So where does the method live? Like what class does it belong to? Because you're going to have to qualify the method with the class name so it knows where to find it. What does it take in to do its job? What's its argument? And then what's its return type? What kind of thing is that method giving you back in case I need to store it into a variable, or even when I'm printing it out, just to know what kind of thing I'm going to actually print out. And so we can try one more example here. Maybe something else in the math class, another very common one that we're going to use. I'll scroll up a little bit here. Would be if I need to do a power. Notice here, if you look at this method, so if I was going to print out, let's say, just a system .out.print. Let's say I want to take my num1 and raise it to the third power. So I'm using the pow method. There's always parentheses in every method. And now, where's it going to find the pow method? Well, you need to qualify it by giving its class, so math.pow. It's going to return me and we can look at this and verify it. The power method returns me a double, so I'm going to just print out that double. But notice what its arguments are. It takes in two different values separated by a comma. So when a method takes in multiple arguments, each argument is separated by a comma. It's telling you the first thing is a double that it's taking in, the second thing is double. So, and if you clicked on pow, it would give you a little bit more information about it. But basically it says that the first number, A, is the base of the power, and B is the exponent. And so if I go back to my code here and I wanted to raise my num1 to the third power, I'd say num1 comma 3, and forget my semicolon here at the end. Notice no more errors, and when I run it, it would actually give me the num1 cubed. So that's just a little bit about using math operations, and certainly you can look in the API there and start getting used to reading the API, finding methods to accomplish whatever task you need to do. So hopefully that'll help you out with some of the math methods.